Hey folks, I'm excited to share some stories with you today that I've written myself. Whether you're a long-time follower or just joining us, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these tales. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe if you're new here. Let's dive in, and I hope you enjoy. I discovered a live stream of my own future death on the dark web. Hey everyone, I know this might sound crazy, but I need to share this with someone. I've been a lurker on Reddit for years, but this is the first time I've ever posted. I don't even know where to start, but here goes nothing. A few weeks ago, I was deep diving into the dark web. I know. It's a stupid thing to do, but curiosity got the best of me. I was bored and looking for something to kill time. I've always been into tech and hacking, so I thought I'd check out some of the hidden sites people always talk about. Most of it was the usual illegal crap, drugs, weapons, counterfeit money. But then I found something that chilled me to my core. It started with a simple chat room. People were talking about the ultimate live stream. I was intrigued and asked what they meant. One user, the Watcher99, sent me a private message with a link. He said it was an exclusive stream and that I needed to watch it. Against my better judgment, I clicked on the link. The site was dark and minimalist, with nothing but a video player in the center. It looked like a typical live streaming platform, but there was no chat, no comments, just the stream. I sat there for a few minutes, watching nothing but static. I was about to close the tab when the screen flickered and a video feed appeared. The camera was positioned in a room that looked strangely familiar. It was dimly lit, with a single overhead light casting eerie shadows. The walls were bare, except for some old peeling wallpaper. There was a sense of deja vu that I couldn't shake. Then it hit me. This was my bedroom, or at least it looked exactly like it. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Before I could process what I was seeing, a figure walked into the frame. It was a man, dressed in all black, wearing a ski mask. He moved with a chilling calmness, like he had done this 1,000 times before. He was holding a large knife, and my heart started pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself that this was just a sick joke, that someone had somehow recreated my room and was messing with me. But then the camera zoomed in on the man's face. He reached up and pulled off his mask, and I felt my blood run cold. It was me. I was staring at myself, but there was something off about my expression. My eyes were hollow, devoid of any emotion. I looked like a puppet, moving on strings. The other me started talking, and the sound of my own voice coming from the speakers made me jump. He said, "Hello everyone, welcome to the final show." His tone was flat, almost robotic. He walked over to the bed and sat down, still holding the knife. "Tonight we have a special guest, someone very close to my heart." He chuckled, a dry, lifeless sound. At that moment, the camera panned to the corner of the room, and I felt like I was going to be sick. There was a figure tied to a chair, struggling against the bonds. It was a woman, and as the camera zoomed in, I recognized her. It was my girlfriend, Emily. Her face was bruised and bloody, and she had a gag in her mouth. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My mind was racing, trying to understand what the hell was happening. The other me stood up and walked over to Emily. He placed the knife against her cheek, and she flinched. "Don't worry, it'll be over soon," he said in that same deadpan voice. He started cutting her slowly, deliberately, and I could see the blood dripping down her face. She was screaming behind the gag, her eyes wide with terror. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, forced to watch as this nightmare unfolded in front of me. The other me didn't stop. He kept cutting, moving down to her arms, her legs, slicing into her flesh with a sickening precision. Her muffled screams echoed in my head, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of twisted prank, but it wasn't. The blood, the pain in Emily's eyes, the expression on my doppelganger's face, it was all too real. He was enjoying this, taking pleasure in her suffering. And the worst part was, I knew it was me. I could feel it in my bones. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stopped. Emily was barely conscious, her body covered in deep, bleeding cuts. The other me turned back to the camera, his face splattered with her blood. "Thank you for watching," he said, smiling. "I hope you enjoyed the show." The screen went black, and I was left staring at my reflection on the monitor. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind was a whirlwind of horror and confusion. I checked the time. I had been watching for over an hour, but it felt like just a few minutes had passed. I don't know what to do. I've been checking on Emily constantly, making sure she's okay. She has no idea what I saw, and I don't know how to tell her. I'm terrified that this is some kind of premonition, that the future is already set, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. But I have to try. I have to find out who's behind this, and why they're targeting me. I've been digging through the dark web, looking for any clues, but so far I found nothing. I'm scared, and I don't know who to trust. I just hope I can figure this out before it's too late. I'll update you guys if I find anything. Thanks for reading, and please be careful out there. Hey everyone, it's been a few days since my last post, and things have only gotten worse. I've barely slept, and every time I close my eyes, I see that horrifying stream replaying in my mind. I don't know how to make it stop, and I'm terrified of what might happen next. I decided to take some action. The first thing I did was install security cameras around my apartment. I put one in my bedroom, one in the living room, and another at the entrance. I figured if something weird was going on, at least I'd have evidence. I also started carrying a knife with me everywhere I go. It's not much, but it makes me feel a little safer. Emily noticed that something was off. She kept asking if I was okay, and I kept brushing it off, saying I was just stressed from work. I wanted to tell her the truth, but I didn't want to scare her. She's been through enough already. One night, I decided to show her the cameras. I thought it would make her feel safer too. She was surprised, but didn't ask too many questions, which was a relief. I was hoping that maybe, just maybe, all of this was in my head and the cameras would prove it. Then the nightmares started. They were vivid and horrifying, like the live stream had crawled into my subconscious and taken root. I would dream about the other me, standing over Emily's bleeding body, his face twisted into a sick grin. Every night it was the same, and every morning I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a drum. One particularly bad night, I woke up around 3 a.m. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I got up and checked the cameras on my phone. Everything seemed normal at first, but then I noticed something on the bedroom feed. There was a shadow in the corner, near the window. It was barely visible, but it was there, and it wasn't moving. I stared at the screen, trying to figure out what it was. My mind was racing, thinking about the live stream, the other me, and all the horrible things I'd seen. I decided to check it out. I grabbed my knife and slowly made my way to the bedroom. Emily was fast asleep, and I didn't want to wake her. I approached the corner, my heart pounding in my ears. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a shadow. It was a figure, standing perfectly still. I reached out with my free hand and flicked on the light. The room was suddenly flooded with brightness, and the figure vanished. It was like it had never been there. I checked the camera feed again, and the shadow was gone. I didn't know what to think. Was my mind playing tricks on me? Was I losing it? I decided to go back to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening for any signs of movement. The next day, I tried to go about my routine as normally as possible. I went to work, tried to focus on my tasks, but my mind kept drifting back to that shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When I got home, I checked the cameras again. Everything seemed normal, but I knew better than to trust appearances. That night, I set up an alert on my phone to notify me if any of the cameras detected movement. I was determined to catch whatever it was that was haunting me. I didn't care how paranoid it made me look. I had to know. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed it and checked the alert. The bedroom camera had detected movement. I took a deep breath and pulled up the feed. There, standing at the foot of my bed, was the figure. It was clearer this time, more defined. It looked exactly like the other me from the live stream. I couldn't breathe. I watched as the figure moved, slowly walking around the bed. It reached out a hand and gently brushed Emily's hair. She stirred, but didn't wake up. The figure turned its head and looked directly at the camera, directly at me. Its eyes were empty, hollow voids. It smiled, a slow, menacing grin. I jumped out of bed, knife in hand, and rushed to the bedroom. I threw open the door, ready to confront whatever was there, but the room was empty. Emily was still asleep, undisturbed. I checked the camera feed again, and the figure was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room, clutching the knife, my eyes glued to the camera feeds. Nothing else happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper into the dark web. I had to find out who the Watcher 99 was and how he was doing this. I posted in the same chat room, asking about the live stream. Most people ignored me, but one user, Dark Scribe, responded. He said he'd seen the stream too, and that it was a warning. I asked him what he meant, but he just sent me a link to another site. This one was different, more professional looking. It had a series of videos, all of them labeled with dates. I clicked on the most recent one, and my stomach dropped. It was another live stream, showing someone's future death. This time, it was a woman I didn't recognize, but the pattern was the same. The doppelganger, the torture, the horrifying finale. I felt sick. How many people had seen this? How many lives had been destroyed by these streams? I knew I had to keep digging, but the more I found, the more hopeless it seemed. These people, whoever they were, had power, resources, and a sick sense of entertainment. I've been trying to find more information, but it's slow going. I feel like I'm running out of time. I don't know what to do, who to trust. Emily doesn't know, and I can't bring myself to tell her. I'm terrified of what might happen if I do. I'll keep you updated as best as I can. Please, if anyone has any information or advice, let me know. I need all the help I can get. Hey everyone, I'm back with an update, and things have escalated in ways I never could have imagined. I wish I could say things have gotten better, but the truth is, they've gotten so much worse. I'm scared out of my mind, and I don't know what to do. After my last post, I decided to confront Emily about everything. I couldn't keep her in the dark any longer. She deserved to know what was happening. One evening, I sat her down and told her everything. The live stream, the shadow, the other me. I expected her to freak out, but she listened quietly, her face growing paler with each word. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I've been seeing things too," she said. "I didn't want to tell you because I thought you'd think I was crazy." She told me about the shadows she'd seen moving in the corners of the room, the strange noises at night, and the feeling of being watched. It was all too much of a coincidence. We decided to get out of the apartment for a while. Maybe a change of scenery would help us clear our heads. We booked a weekend at a cabin in the woods, far away from the city. It was isolated, quiet, the perfect place to try and escape the nightmare that had taken over our lives. The first night at the cabin was uneventful. We drank some wine, played some board games, and tried to pretend that everything was normal. But I could tell we were both on edge, constantly glancing over our shoulders, jumping at the slightest sound. The second night was when things went to hell. It was around midnight, and we were sitting by the fireplace talking about anything and everything except the live stream. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was an alert from the security cameras back at the apartment. I pulled up the feed, my heart racing. There, in the middle of the living room, was the figure. It was standing perfectly still, facing the camera. Its eyes were as hollow and lifeless as before. I showed the screen to Emily, and she gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. As we watched, the figure started moving. It walked slowly, deliberately, towards the bedroom, towards Emily. My blood ran cold. It was like it knew we were watching. It reached the bedroom door and paused, turning to look directly into the camera again. Then it opened the door and stepped inside. I felt a surge of panic. "We need to go back," I said, standing up. "We need to stop this." Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. We grabbed our stuff and rushed out to the car. The drive back to the city felt like it took forever, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When we finally got to the apartment, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I took a deep breath and unlocked the door, knife in hand. We stepped inside, and the place was eerily quiet. I checked the cameras on my phone. The figure was gone. We searched the apartment, top to bottom, but there was no sign of the intruder. Everything looked untouched, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew we were being toyed with. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat in the living room, the knife on the coffee table between us, watching the camera feeds. Around 3 a.m., the bedroom camera detected movement again. I pulled up the feed, and my blood turned to ice. There, lying on the bed, was Emily, or at least it looked like her. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful. The figure stood over her, its hand resting on her forehead. I glanced over at the real Emily, who was sitting next to me, shaking her head in disbelief. The figure started speaking, but there was no sound. It was like watching a muted video. I tried to read its lips, but the words didn't make any sense. It leaned down, placing its lips close to the doppelganger Emily's ear, whispering something. Then it stood up, walked to the camera, and smiled. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the knife and stormed into the bedroom, Emily right behind me. The room was empty, but the bed was a mess, the sheets tangled and strewn across the floor. It was like someone had been there, but there was no one to be found. We were losing our minds. Every noise, every shadow felt like a threat. We decided to stay in the same room from then on, not letting each other out of our sight. I called in sick to work, and Emily did the same. We needed to figure this out, but we had no idea where to start. I went back to the dark web, looking for the Watcher 99 and Darkscribe. I posted in every chat room I could find, asking for help, for any information about the live stream. Days passed, and I got nothing but silence or cryptic messages. Finally, Darkscribe responded. He sent me another link, this one to a forum discussing the live streams. It was filled with stories like mine, people who had seen their own deaths, who had been haunted by doppelgangers, who had lost loved ones to these sick games. One post stood out. It was from someone who claimed to have survived their own death. The user, Survivor001, said they had managed to break the cycle by confronting their doppelganger directly. They had tracked down the source of the livestream and destroyed the equipment. It sounded insane, but it was the only lead I had. I messaged Survivor001, begging for more information. They responded with an address, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. They said I had to go alone, that bringing Emily would only put her in more danger. I didn't want to leave her, but I knew I had to try. I explained everything to Emily, and she reluctantly agreed to stay behind. I promised her I would be careful, that I would come back. I'm writing this just before I leave. I don't know what I'll find at the warehouse, but I have to try. I can't keep living like this in constant fear. I'll update you all as soon as I can. Wish me luck. Hey everyone, it's taken me a while to gather my thoughts and write this, but here's what happened after my last post. I know some of you might think I'm making this up, but I swear every word is true. This is by far the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. So I headed to the address Survivor001 gave me, the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was late at night, and the place looked like something out of a horror movie. The building was old and crumbling, surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted out cars. The windows were boarded up, and the whole place had a creepy, deserted vibe. I parked my car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I kept my knife in my hand, ready for anything. As I approached the entrance, I noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, filled with debris and old machinery. I pulled out my flashlight and started searching for any clues. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own footsteps echoing off the walls. I made my way through the maze of corridors, my senses on high alert. Eventually, I found a stairwell leading down to the basement. The air grew colder as I descended, and the smell of mildew was overwhelming. At the bottom, I found a heavy metal door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was filled with rows of old computer equipment, wires and cables snaking across the floor. In the center of the room was a large rusted metal table, stained with what looked like old blood. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was the place. This was where the live streams were being broadcast. I approached the table, my flashlight flickering. On the far wall, there was a large monitor, and to my horror, it flickered to life as I got closer. The screen showed a live feed of my apartment, the living room specifically. Emily was there, pacing back and forth, looking worried. Before I could process what I was seeing, the screen changed. It now showed a close-up of Emily, sitting on the couch, her face etched with fear. The camera slowly panned out, revealing the figure standing behind her. The other me. He had the same hollow eyes, the same sickening grin. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. I was helpless, watching as the figure raised a knife and brought it down towards Emily. She screamed, and the screen went black. I felt a wave of nausea and panic wash over me. I had to get back to her. I had to stop this. But before I could move, I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, knife in hand, and there he was, the other me, standing in the doorway, his eyes glowing with a sinister light. He moved towards me, his expression cold and unfeeling. "You're too late," he said, his voice a perfect echo of mine. "She's mine now." I lunged at him, the knife aimed at his chest, but he was fast. He dodged my attack and knocked the knife out of my hand. We struggled, grappling on the floor. Our movements mirrored. It was like fighting a twisted version of myself. Every move counted with an uncanny precision. As we fought, the room seemed to blur around us. I could hear the faint sounds of screams and laughter, like the echoes of the past victims trapped in this place. The other me was strong, almost inhumanly so. He pinned me down, his hands closing around my throat. I gasped for air, struggling to break free. In a moment of desperation, I reached out and grabbed a loose cable from the floor, swinging it at his head. It connected with a sickening thud, and he fell back, giving me a moment to breathe. I scrambled to my feet, looking for something, anything to use as a weapon. My eyes landed on an old metal pipe, half buried under some debris. I grabbed it and turned to face my doppelganger. He was getting up, a malevolent smile on his face. I didn't wait for him to attack. I swung the pipe with all my strength, hitting him square in the chest. He stumbled back, and I swung again, this time connecting with his head. He collapsed to the floor, unmoving. I stood there panting, the pipe still in my hands. I wasn't sure if he was dead or just unconscious, but I couldn't waste any more time. I had to get back to Emily. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed out of the room, up the stairs, and out of the warehouse. The drive back to my apartment was a blur, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. When I finally got home, I burst through the door, calling out for Emily. The apartment was eerily silent. I checked every room, my heart sinking with each passing second. She was gone. There was no sign of her, no sign of the struggle I'd seen on the screen. It was like she had vanished into thin air. I collapsed on the couch, my mind reeling. What had I done? Had I failed to save her? I checked the camera feeds, but they were all offline. It was like the entire system had been wiped clean. I felt a deep, gnawing despair settle in my chest. I don't know what to do now. Emily is gone, and I'm left with more questions than answers. I'm terrified that the other me is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. I can't shake the feeling that this nightmare is far from over. I'll keep searching for Emily, and I'll keep fighting. I have to. If anyone has any more information, please, I beg you, share it with me. I can't do this alone. Hey everyone, This will be my final update. I've been through hell and back, and I think I finally have some answers. I'm not sure if I'll make it out of this alive, but I need to get this out there. If anything happens to me, maybe someone else can pick up where I left off. After Emily vanished, I was a wreck. I spent days combing through every piece of information I could find on the dark web, trying to understand what had happened. I barely slept, barely ate. I was consumed by the need to find her, to make sense of the madness that had taken over my life. I finally got a breakthrough when I received a message from Survivor 001. He told me to meet him at a specific location in the city, an old abandoned church that was rumored to be haunted. It was the last place I wanted to go, but I was desperate. I agreed to meet him at midnight. When I arrived at the church, the place was as creepy as you'd expect. The building was falling apart, the stained glass windows shattered, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. I stepped inside, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. I found Survivor 001 waiting in the nave, standing next to an altar covered in dust and cobwebs. He was a tall, gaunt man with deep-set eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He greeted me with a nod and got straight to the point. "We don't have much time," he said. "They're watching us, even now." I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. What is this place? What's happening to me? Survivor 001 sighed, looking around the darkened church. This place was once used by a cult that believed in alternate realities. They performed rituals to create doppelgangers, twisted versions of people from other dimensions. The live streams are their way of feeding off the fear and suffering. They're using technology and dark magic to merge our world with theirs. I could barely wrap my head around what he was saying. "So, the other me?" He nodded. "He's from a parallel reality, a version of you that's been corrupted. They've been sending these doppelgangers to replace their counterparts in our world. When they succeed, they take over completely, erasing the original." My mind was reeling. How do I stop it? How do I get Emily back? Survivor 001 handed me a small ornate dagger. This dagger is enchanted. It's the only thing that can sever the connection between the two realities. You need to find the ritual site and destroy it. That's where they're keeping Emily. He gave me another address, this one even more remote than the warehouse. It was an old, abandoned mansion on the outskirts of the city. He warned me that it would be heavily guarded, that I needed to be prepared for anything. I thanked him and made my way to the mansion. The place was massive, looming over the surrounding trees like a dark sentinel. I approached cautiously, the dagger clutched in my hand. The front door was unlocked, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of incense and decay. The mansion was filled with old, rotting furniture and strange symbols painted on the walls. I moved silently, my heart pounding in my chest, following the faint sound of chanting. I found the source of the noise in a large, dimly lit room. A group of robed figures stood in a circle, chanting in a language I didn't understand. In the center of the circle was a large stone altar, and lying on it was Emily, unconscious and bound. I felt a surge of rage and fear. I had to act fast. I crept closer, staying in the shadows, and waited for the right moment. When one of the figures moved away from the circle, I lunged, plunging the dagger into his back. He collapsed with a gurgled scream, and the chanting stopped abruptly. The other figures turned towards me, their faces hidden by their hoods. I didn't wait for them to react. I charged at the altar, slashing at anyone who got in my way. The enchanted dagger seemed to hum with power, cutting through the robed figures like they were made of paper. I reached Emily and quickly cut her bonds. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "We have to go now," I whispered urgently. She nodded weakly, and I helped her to her feet. As we made our way to the exit, I felt a cold presence behind me. I turned to see my doppelganger standing there, his hollow eyes burning with hatred. He moved towards us, and I knew this was it, the final confrontation. I handed the dagger to Emily. "Run. Get out of here. I'll hold him off." She hesitated, but I pushed her towards the door. "Go." She ran, and I faced my other self. He smiled, a chilling, emotionless grin. "You can't win," he said. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than all of us." I didn't reply. I charged at him, the dagger in my hand. We clashed, and it was like fighting a dark reflection. Every move I made, he counted. Every strike he parried. It was like fighting myself, but stronger, more ruthless. But I had something he didn't. Desperation. I fought with everything I had, fueled by the need to protect Emily, to end this nightmare. Finally, I saw an opening. I plunged the dagger into his chest, and he let out a scream that echoed through the mansion. His body convulsed, and for a moment, I saw the shadows of other faces flicker across his own. Then he collapsed, dissolving into a dark, smoky mist. I stood there panting, the dagger still in my hand. I didn't waste any time. I ran out of the mansion, finding Emily waiting for me by the car. We drove away, the mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror. Since that night, things have been different. The cameras stopped detecting any strange movements, and the nightmares have lessened. Emily and I are trying to move on, but the scars are still there. We know we're not completely safe, that there are still forces out there beyond our understanding. I've disconnected from the dark web completely. I don't want to risk falling into that abyss again. Survivor 001 has gone silent, and I can only hope he's okay. I don't know what the future holds, but we're taking it one day at a time. I'm sharing this story, not just to warn others, but to remind myself of what we went through. If you're ever tempted to explore the dark web, think twice. There are things out there that no one should ever see. Thank you for following our story. Stay safe, and don't take anything for granted. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows. The dark web clinic that offered to replace my memories. Hey, Reddit, I'm not really sure where to start with this. I'm not even sure if posting this is a good idea, but I need to get it out. I need someone to know what happened, even if it's just strangers on the internet. I'm writing this under a throwaway account because I don't want anyone to trace it back to me. A few months ago, I was in a really bad place. My life was falling apart. My girlfriend left me, I lost my job, and I just couldn't seem to get my shit together. I started spending a lot of time online, diving into the dark web out of sheer boredom and curiosity. That's where I found something that seemed like a miracle at the time. It was a forum post titled, "Erase Your Pain, Memory Replacement Clinic." It sounded like complete bullshit, like one of those fake ads promising to enlarge your, but I was desperate, and the idea of erasing my painful memories sounded too good to pass up. I clicked on the link, and it took me to a website that looked surprisingly professional. It had a sleek design with a logo that reminded me of something you'd see on a hospital brochure. The tagline was "Erase, Replace, and Rejuvenate." There were testimonials from people who claimed their lives had been transformed after undergoing the procedure. They looked happy, peaceful. It felt like hope. I filled out a contact form, not really expecting a response. But the next day, I received an email. It was from someone named Dr. Marlowe, and it was very formal, almost like a job offer. They wanted to schedule a consultation, and they assured me that the procedure was completely safe and effective. I won't lie, I was skeptical, but the idea of getting rid of my misery was too tempting. I agreed to meet with them. The email included an address, and to my surprise, it was in the city where I lived. That should have been the first red flag. The clinic was in a part of town I didn't visit often, an industrial area that was mostly abandoned. When I arrived, the building looked like an old warehouse, but the inside was a different story. It was clean, almost sterile, with a reception area that wouldn't look out of place in a high-end medical facility. A woman at the front desk greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She asked me to fill out some forms and then led me to a small room with a single chair and a large, imposing desk. Dr. Marlowe walked in shortly after. He was tall, with a kind face that somehow felt off, like he was wearing a mask. He explained the procedure in detail. It was a mix of advanced neurology and some kind of experimental technology that they had developed. They would scan my brain, identify the memories I wanted to erase, and replace them with new, happier ones. It sounded insane, but Dr. Marlowe spoke with such confidence that I started to believe it was possible. I asked him about the risks, and he assured me there were none. He said they'd done hundreds of these procedures with no complications. He showed me a contract that detailed everything, and in my desperation, I signed it without reading the fine print. They scheduled my procedure for the next week. The day of the procedure, I was nervous but excited. The thought of living without the constant pain and regret was like a light at the end of a very dark tunnel. They led me into a room that looked like an operating theater, with a large, intimidating machine in the center. They strapped me into a chair and placed a helmet-like device over my head. Dr. Marlowe gave me a reassuring smile before they put me under. I woke up in a recovery room feeling different, lighter. Memories of my girlfriend leaving, of losing my job, they were hazy, like a bad dream that fades when you wake up. In their place were new memories, a happy childhood, a successful career, a loving relationship. It felt real, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely happy. But that happiness was short-lived. Over the next few days, things started to go wrong. The new memories began to bleed into my reality in ways that didn't make sense. I would find myself in places I didn't remember going, doing things I didn't remember doing. People would call me by different names, and strangers would act like they knew me. And then the nightmares started. Horrible, vivid nightmares that left me waking up in a cold sweat. They weren't memories, at least not mine, but they felt real. In the dreams, I was in a dark place, surrounded by shadows that whispered things I couldn't understand. I would see flashes of people. Some I recognized from my old memories. Others were complete strangers. They were all screaming, crying, their faces twisted in agony. I tried to reach out to the clinic, but the phone number was disconnected and the website was gone. The building where the clinic was located was empty, like it had never been there. I was left with no answers, only more questions and a growing sense of dread. And then, one night, I woke up to find Dr. Marlowe standing at the foot of my bed. He was smiling, but his eyes were empty, like a doll's. He told me that the procedure was a success, but that there were some side effects. He said that the new memories had come from other patients, and sometimes fragments of their experiences could bleed through. He said it was nothing to worry about, that it would pass with time. But it hasn't. If anything, it's getting worse. The nightmares are more frequent, more intense. I see things when I'm awake now. Shadows in the corners of my vision, faces in the mirror that aren't mine. I hear voices whispering my name, telling me to do things I don't want to do. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if something far worse is going on. All I know is that I need help, and I don't know where to turn. If anyone out there has experienced something similar or knows anything about this clinic, please, I beg you, reach out to me. I'm scared. I'm really, really scared, and I don't know how much more of this I can take. It's been a few weeks since I posted part 1, and things have only gotten worse. I appreciate all the advice and support from those who reached out, but I need to tell the rest of this story while I still can. I think they're coming for me soon. The nightmares escalated to the point where I could barely sleep. When I did, it was fitful and plagued with visions of pain and suffering. The worst part was that these weren't my nightmares. They were someone else's. I could tell by the way the scenes played out, the details that didn't fit with my life. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint at first, like a radio just out of tune, but it grew louder until it filled the room. The voices were speaking in hushed, urgent tones, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was like they were arguing, and then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I tried to brush it off as a dream, but the next morning, I noticed something strange. There were muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bed. I live alone, and I always lock my doors and windows before I go to sleep. I cleaned up the mess and tried to convince myself it was just a prank or some kind of hallucination, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. Things continued to deteriorate. The shadows that I saw in the corners of my vision began to take shape. They were humanoid, but wrong, like they were stretched and distorted. They would watch me from the dark corners of my apartment, never moving, just observing. I could feel their eyes on me, even when I turned away. One evening, I decided to confront them. I had had enough of the fear and paranoia. I grabbed a kitchen knife and approached the shadow that lurked in the corner of my living room. As I got closer, it seemed to shift, becoming more solid. When I was within reach, it lunged at me, passing through me like smoke. I felt a cold, clammy sensation that left me gasping for air. I dropped the knife and fell to the floor, clutching my chest. My heart was pounding, and I was drenched in sweat. The shadow was gone, but the fear remained. I knew then that whatever was happening to me was beyond my understanding, and I needed help. I reached out to a few friends, trying to explain what was happening, but they thought I was losing my mind. One of them, Lisa, agreed to come over and stay with me for a few days, just to keep an eye on me. I was grateful for her support, but I didn't want to drag her into this nightmare. The first night she stayed, I slept a little better, knowing someone else was there. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of screaming. I rushed to the guest room where Lisa was staying and found her thrashing around on the bed, her eyes wide open but unseeing. She was screaming my name, begging for help. I tried to wake her, but she was unresponsive. I shook her, slapped her face lightly, but nothing worked. It was like she was trapped in some kind of waking nightmare. Finally, I called 911. The paramedics arrived and took her to the hospital. They said it was some kind of sleep disorder, but I knew better. This was my fault. I visited Lisa in the hospital the next day. She looked pale and shaken, but she was awake. When she saw me, she burst into tears. She told me about the dreams she'd had, the same ones I was having. She described the shadows, the voices, the unbearable sense of dread. It was all too familiar. I knew then that I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. I packed a bag and left, crashing on a friend's couch while I tried to figure out what to do next. I spent hours researching online, trying to find any information about the clinic or Dr. Marlowe, but there was nothing. It was like they never existed. Then I got an email from a blocked address. The subject line read, "We can help you." The message was brief and to the point. It said they knew what was happening to me, and they could fix it. There was an address at the bottom, different from the clinic's original location. Desperation and curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go. The new address led me to a dilapidated building on the outskirts of town. It looked abandoned, with boarded-up windows and graffiti covering the walls. But when I knocked on the door, it opened almost immediately. A man in a lab coat greeted me. He looked normal enough, but his eyes had that same empty look as Dr. Marlowe's. He introduced himself as Dr. Gray and led me inside. The interior was a stark contrast to the exterior, clean, modern, and sterile. Dr. Gray explained that they had moved locations after some unforeseen complications with the previous patients. He assured me that they had refined the procedure and could correct the side effects I was experiencing. Despite everything, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that there was a way out of this nightmare. He led me to a familiar-looking room with a large machine in the center. As they strapped me in and placed the helmet on my head, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. Dr. Gray gave me a reassuring smile as they administered the sedative. My vision blurred, and the last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was his cold, empty eyes staring down at me. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment. It was morning, and everything seemed normal. For a moment, I thought it had all been a bad dream, but then I saw the note on my bedside table. It was from Dr. Gray. It read, "The procedure was a success. You should no longer experience any side effects. If you do, please contact us immediately." I wanted to believe it was over, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The shadows were gone, and the voices were silent, but I could feel something lingering, something dark and malignant. And then, I noticed the scar. It was small, just behind my ear, but it hadn't been there before. I don't know what they did to me, but I know it wasn't just about replacing memories. I can feel something inside me, something foreign and malevolent, and I'm terrified of what might happen next. I've spent the last few days trying to pretend everything is normal, but it's not. The scar behind my ear is a constant reminder that something is wrong. The shadows may be gone and the voices silenced, but a new, deeper dread has taken root. I started noticing small inconsistencies in my life. Things weren't where I left them, and people acted strange around me. My friends would sometimes pause mid-conversation, staring at me with a mixture of confusion and concern, as if they were seeing someone else. One night, while I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something odd in the mirror. My reflection was delayed, like a lag in a video call. I moved my hand, and a second later, my reflection followed. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. It was normal. I told myself it was just stress, lack of sleep, but it didn't feel right. The final straw came when I was at a bar with some friends. I was trying to act normal and have a few drinks and forget about everything. Lisa was there, still recovering, but trying to support me. As the night went on, I started to feel lightheaded, not drunk, but disoriented. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. As I looked into the mirror, my reflection started to change. My face twisted into a grotesque grin, eyes darkening, skin stretching like it was made of rubber. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My reflection leaned closer, pressing its distorted face against the glass, whispering, "They're coming for you." I stumbled out of the bathroom, my heart pounding. I found Lisa and told her we needed to leave. She saw the panic in my eyes and didn't argue. We left the bar and went back to her place. I told her everything, every detail I had left out before. She listened, her face growing paler with each word. She believed me. She suggested we go to the police, but I knew they wouldn't help. They'd think I was crazy. We decided to do some more digging online, see if we could find any other victims. It took hours, but we finally found something. A hidden forum with posts from people who had gone through similar experiences. One post stood out. It was from a guy named Mark who had undergone the same procedure at the same clinic. He described the nightmares, the shadowy figures, the inconsistencies in his life. He also mentioned the scar behind his ear. It was like reading my own story. Mark's last post was chilling. He wrote that he had discovered the truth. The clinic wasn't just replacing memories. They were implanting something in their patients, a kind of neural parasite that could control their actions, feed off their emotions. He said he was going to confront them, that he would post an update soon. That update never came. I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. If Mark was right, it meant I wasn't in control of my own mind. It explained the strange behavior, the reflection in the mirror. But why? What was their endgame? I told Lisa we needed to find the new clinic location. She was hesitant, but agreed to help. We spent the next few days scouring the internet, looking for any clues. Eventually, we found a lead, a seemingly innocuous shipping company that had ties to both the old and new clinic addresses. We decided to stake out the company's warehouse. It was risky, but we had no other choice. We spent a few nights parked outside in Lisa's car, watching for any suspicious activity. On the third night, we saw a van pull up to the warehouse. Two men in lab coats got out and unloaded several large crates. We waited until they left, then snuck up to the building. The door was locked, but Lisa, being resourceful, managed to pick it. Inside, the warehouse was filled with medical equipment, crates labeled with patient numbers and files. We started going through the files, looking for anything that could explain what they were doing. And then we found it. A folder labeled Project Icarus. Inside were detailed reports on the procedure, the neural parasites, and the ultimate goal: to create a network of human hosts that could be controlled remotely. They were using us as guinea pigs, testing their technology before rolling it out on a larger scale. My file was there, along with Mark's and dozens of others. The reports detailed our progress, the side effects, the adjustments they made. It was horrifying to read about myself as a test subject, my life reduced to a series of data points. We took as many files as we could carry and got out of there. Back at Lisa's place, we started going through the documents, trying to find a way to remove the parasite. One file mentioned a deactivation sequence, but it required specialized equipment that was likely back at the warehouse. We knew it was dangerous, but we had no other choice. We had to go back and try to find the equipment. If we could deactivate the parasites in ourselves and others, we might be able to stop this. As we were planning our next move, I received another email from a blocked address. It was a single sentence. "You shouldn't have come back." My blood ran cold. They knew. They were watching us. I told Lisa we needed to leave immediately, but as we were packing up, we heard a knock on the door. Through the peephole, I saw Dr. Gray standing there, his expression as cold and empty as ever. He called out, "We need to talk. You've been very naughty, and it's time for your punishment." Lisa grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and I armed myself with a heavy lamp. We were ready to fight, but deep down, I knew it was futile. The clinic had resources, technology, and who knew how many more patients under their control. Dr. Gray started to bang on the door harder, his calm facade slipping. "Open the door, or we'll come in by force." I looked at Lisa, her face set with determination. We nodded at each other, knowing this might be our last stand. I opened the door, and Dr. Gray stepped inside, flanked by two burly men in lab coats. Before he could say anything, Lisa lunged at him with the knife. One of the men grabbed her, pinning her to the ground. I swung the lamp at the other, but he caught it midair, his grip like a vice. Dr. Gray smiled, a sick, twisted grin. "You don't understand," he said, leaning in close. "You belong to us now. You always will." The last thing I remember was a sharp pain in my neck and everything going black. When I woke up, I was strapped to a table in a sterile white room. Dr. Gray was standing over me, holding a syringe. "We're going to fix you," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "And this time, there will be no more mistakes." I felt the needle pierce my skin, and a cold numbness spread through my body. My vision blurred, and I could hear Lisa's muffled scream somewhere in the distance. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness again was Dr. Gray's empty, soulless eyes staring down at me. When I regained consciousness, I was back in my apartment. At first, I thought it was another nightmare, but the pain in my neck and the fog in my mind told me otherwise. The memories of being strapped to that table, Dr. Gray's cold voice, and Lisa's screams flooded back. My body ached, and I felt a strange numbness in my limbs. I could move, but everything felt disconnected. I stumbled to the bathroom, looking for any signs of what they had done to me. The scar behind my ear was still there, but now there was another one on my neck, fresh and red. I touched it gingerly, wincing at the pain. They had done something to me again, and I had no idea what. Lisa was nowhere to be found. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic set in as I realized she might still be in their clutches. I needed to find her, but I also needed to understand what they had done to me. I grabbed the files we had taken from the warehouse and started reading through them, hoping to find any clues. The documents were dense, filled with technical jargon that I could barely understand. But one thing was clear. They were experimenting with controlling human minds, using the neural parasites to create a network of hosts. The parasites could be deactivated, but the equipment required was back at the clinic, and accessing it would be nearly impossible now. As I read, I found references to a control room where the neural network was monitored and managed. If I could find that room, maybe I could shut the whole operation down. But first, I needed to find Lisa. I hacked into the shipping company's database using the credentials we found in the warehouse. It wasn't easy, but desperation gave me the focus I needed. I found a list of recent deliveries, one of which was to a remote location outside the city. The description matched the kind of equipment used in the procedures. It was my best lead. I packed a bag with essentials and headed out. The location was a couple of hours away, deep in the woods. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow, every passing car seemed to be following me. Paranoia was setting in, but I had to keep going. When I arrived, it was well past midnight. The building was an old, abandoned factory, surrounded by overgrown vegetation. It looked like the perfect place for a clandestine operation. I parked a distance away and approached on foot, sticking to the shadows. The entrance was guarded, but the guards were lax, probably not expecting anyone to find this place. I waited for the right moment and slipped inside. The interior was a maze of hallways and rooms, most of them filled with old machinery and debris. But deeper inside, I found a section that was clearly in use, with lights and modern equipment. I moved silently, listening for any signs of Lisa. Eventually, I heard voices coming from a room down the hall. I peered through a crack in the door and saw her, strapped to a table with Dr. Gray and his assistants, preparing another injection. Rage and fear surged through me. I couldn't let them hurt her. I looked around for anything I could use as a weapon and found a heavy wrench. Taking a deep breath, I burst into the room, swinging the wrench at the nearest assistant. The blow caught him off guard, and he crumpled to the floor. Dr. Gray turned, surprise flashing across his face before it was replaced with that cold, empty expression. He moved towards me, but I swung the wrench again, this time aiming for his head. He dodged, but the distraction was enough for me to reach Lisa. I started to unstrap her, but Dr. Gray grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "You're too late," he hissed. "You can't save her. You can't save yourself." I struggled against him, but his strength was unnatural. The other assistant lunged at me, and in the chaos, I felt a sharp pain in my side. I looked down to see a syringe sticking out of my flesh. My vision started to blur, and my limbs grew heavy. "No!" I screamed, fighting against the darkness closing in. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them take Lisa. With the last of my strength, I pulled the syringe out and plunged it into Dr. Gray's neck. He recoiled, eyes wide with shock and anger. I used the momentary distraction to finish unstrapping Lisa. She was groggy but conscious. "Run," I whispered as the room started to spin. "Get out of here," Lisa hesitated, her eyes filled with fear and confusion, but then she nodded. She grabbed the wrench from my hand and swung it at the remaining assistant, giving herself a clear path to the door. She looked back at me one last time before disappearing into the hallway. Dr. Gray recovered quickly, yanking the syringe out and throwing it aside. He loomed over me, his face twisted with rage. "You've ruined everything," he snarled. "But it doesn't matter. We have what we need." He reached for another syringe, but before he could inject me, the lights flickered and an alarm blared through the facility. I heard footsteps and shouting from down the hall. Lisa must have triggered some kind of alarm. Dr. Gray cursed under his breath and looked down at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he said before turning and fleeing the room. I lay there, struggling to stay conscious, the pain in my side throbbing. I knew I had to move, had to find a way out before they came back. Gathering all my strength, I pushed myself up and stumbled towards the door. The hallway was a blur of light and shadow. I could hear the sounds of a struggle, but I couldn't focus. I just kept moving, hoping to find an exit. Finally, I saw an emergency exit sign glowing ahead. I pushed through the door and into the cool night air. I staggered into the woods, the pain and exhaustion overwhelming me. I collapsed to the ground, my vision fading. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the distant sound of sirens and the hope that maybe, just maybe, Lisa had gotten away. I woke up in a hospital bed, the harsh white lights glaring down at me. My head throbbed and my side was bandaged tightly. I tried to sit up, but the pain was too much. As I lay back, I saw a familiar face at my bedside. Lisa. She looked exhausted, but relieved to see me awake. "Hey," she said softly, her voice filled with concern. "How are you feeling?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. She handed me a cup of water, and I sipped it gratefully. "What happened?" I croaked. Lisa filled me in. After she escaped the facility, she managed to find a road and flag down a passing car. The driver called the police, and they raided the factory. Dr. Gray and his assistants were nowhere to be found, but they found me unconscious and brought me to the hospital. Lisa had stayed with me, waiting for me to wake up. "They're still out there," I said, the realization hitting me hard. "They won't stop." "We'll figure something out," Lisa assured me. "We'll get through this." Days turned into weeks as I recovered. Lisa and I stayed in touch, trying to piece together what we could. The files we had stolen were now in the hands of the authorities, but we knew it would take time for them to act. Meanwhile, the nightmares returned, worse than ever. The shadows were back, darker and more sinister. One night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was Dr. Gray. He didn't move, just watched me with those cold, empty eyes. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He stepped closer, and I felt a familiar coldness wash over me. "You can't escape us," he whispered. "We're inside you, always." I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. It was just a dream, but it felt so real. I could still feel his presence, like a dark cloud hanging over me. I knew then that the only way to end this was to confront him, to find out the truth about what they had done to me. With Lisa's help, I started digging deeper. We reached out to the other victims we had found online, sharing our stories and gathering information. One name kept coming up: Dr. Gray's mentor, a man named Dr. Reinhardt. He was the mastermind behind the memory replacement technology and the neural parasites. He had gone off the grid years ago, but there were rumors that he was still conducting experiments in a secluded lab. Through a series of anonymous tips and hacked documents, we finally found a location, an old mansion in the countryside, far from any prying eyes. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. Lisa and I prepared for the confrontation, gathering what little resources we could. We drove out to the mansion, arriving just as the sun was setting. The place was imposing, with tall iron gates and overgrown gardens. It looked abandoned, but we knew better. We snuck around the back, finding a broken window to climb through. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of dark hallways and empty rooms. It felt like something out of a horror movie, each creak of the floorboards sending shivers down my spine. We finally found a hidden staircase leading down to a basement. The air grew colder as we descended, and the smell of chemicals filled the air. At the bottom, we found a makeshift lab filled with the same equipment I had seen at the clinic. And there, in the center of the room, was Dr. Reinhardt. He looked up from his work, his eyes narrowing as he saw us. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice calm and measured. "You need to stop this," I demanded, stepping forward. "You're destroying lives." Dr. Reinhardt shook his head. "You don't understand. This is progress, evolution. We're creating a new humanity, one that can be controlled, perfected." "Perfected," Lisa spat, her voice filled with anger. "You're turning people into puppets." He sighed, as if disappointed in us. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Before we could react, Dr. Gray appeared from the shadows, flanked by 2 more assistants. They moved to restrain us, but we fought back, desperate to end this nightmare once and for all. The struggle was chaotic, filled with shouts and the clatter of equipment being knocked over. In the chaos, I saw an opportunity. One of the machines had a control panel that looked important. I fought my way to it, ripping open the casing and exposing the wires inside. I had no idea what I was doing, but I started pulling wires, hoping to disrupt whatever network they had built. Dr. Gray lunged at me, but Lisa tackled him, giving me enough time to finish. Sparks flew as I yanked the last wire free, and the machines around us powered down with a low hum. Dr. Reinhardt screamed in rage, lunging at me with a scalpel. I dodged, but he managed to slice my arm. I stumbled back, and Lisa grabbed a heavy bookend from a nearby table, striking him across the head. He collapsed, unconscious. We didn't waste any time. We called the authorities, giving them the location and all the evidence we had gathered. As we waited for them to arrive, I felt a strange sensation. The constant pressure in my mind was easing, the shadows receding. The neural parasite, cut off from its control network, was dying. When the police finally arrived, they took Dr. Reinhardt and his accomplices into custody. The mansion was sealed off, and the equipment was confiscated. Lisa and I were taken to the hospital, treated for our injuries, and questioned extensively. It was over, but the scars, physical and mental, would take much longer to heal. In the weeks that followed, the nightmares faded. The shadows and voices disappeared. The memories, both real and implanted, started to settle, and I could finally start to distinguish between them. Lisa and I kept in touch, our shared ordeal forging a bond that couldn't be broken. I'm still haunted by what happened, but I'm trying to move forward. I know there are others out there who might still be under the clinic's influence, and I'm determined to help them if I can. The dark web clinic might be gone, but the scars it left behind will always be a part of me. And as for Dr. Reinhardt and Dr. Gray, I hope they rot in whatever hellhole they end up in. They might have created a network of human puppets, but they underestimated the resilience of the human spirit. We are not their puppets. We are survivors, and we will not be controlled.